The Memphis Grizzlies lost the battle on Wednesday night, a tough defeat at the hands of the Atlanta Hawks, but Ja Morant helped the team get another step closer one way or another to winning the proverbial war. I'm going to talk about that, plus the insanity of trading Jaren Jackson Jr. potentially to the New York Knicks on this installment of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, your host for this edition of the show. No DeMichael Cole, as he is busy once again doing what he does best outside of being a wonderful, beloved member of the Locked On Grizzlies community. He is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal. He's covering the end of Grizzlies Hawks, and I am here with you, ready to break it all down. So glad that you're with me here on Locked On Grizzlies each and every time that an episode drops. Hopefully you are an everydayer at this point. Hopefully you are being a contributing member of our community, making us a part of Locked On Podcast Network, being the number one sports podcast network out there. Thank you so much for your role in that. Whether you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. I appreciate it. I know DeMichael does as well. The Memphis Grizzlies lost a basketball game. And is it really surprising, right? The Grizzlies coming out of their trip to Europe, the time change, the craziness of the past week or so. The week would have been crazy without all the Ja Morant trade chatter, right? Traveling to Berlin, the first ever Berlin game, and then you go to London and you play a really impressive game against the Orlando Magic. You split that series over there overseas, and then you come back. You play on a Sunday, you play again on a Wednesday in an entirely different country. The Grizzlies only had shoot around on Wednesday before the game. They hadn't had a chance to fully practice. Lots of reasons for the Grizzlies to lose this basketball game to the Atlanta Hawks. So I'm not sure that you log in to social media or you go into the Locked On Grizzlies comments and you type away furiously about how terrible the Memphis Grizzlies are. They competed. They competed admirably. And considering how poorly the second quarter in particular went for Memphis and the first half in general in terms of playing defense, they played better in the second half. It wasn't good enough. And again, there's no moral victories in professional basketball, but they did play better. I thought that first and foremost, you have to tip your cap to the Atlanta Hawks and Jaren Johnson. What an impressive basketball player that guy is, making big plays late to help Atlanta win, but also scoring 32 points, having 15 rebounds, 8 assists. So much of what they're trying to do cycles through Jaren Johnson. Kudos to the Hawks. They definitely have something there. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker hit some big shots down the stretch as well. Plus, you saw some big minutes from some old Grizzlies friends and foes, right? Christian Koloko was literally a Grizzly, a week or two ago on 10-day hardship contracts. Koloko, now a member of the Atlanta Hawks, and he gave them some good minutes. He was a +7 in 11 minutes played. CJ McCollum, not necessarily a friend and enemy. I'll never forgive CJ McCollum for breaking Mike Conley's face over a decade ago now. That guy made big plays when it mattered most, kind of in that sixth man role now for the Hawks. Scored 15 points off the bench, knocked down some big threes, had a big steal late against Cedric Coward, who continues to struggle in those big moments like you would expect a rookie to do so. Not worried about that long term, but it's just notable that it was another big late possession where Ced has a turnover, a costly, untimely one. And then Luke Kennard, somebody who I have always loved. Right. I'm a big Luke Kennard guy. If you're an everydayer, if you've been around the show for a while, you know I love Kennard. I like Cam Spencer better for a variety of reasons, as we've talked about recently on the show. But Kennard did get some revenge in 25 minutes played, hit 4 threes, scored 18 points, led the Hawks off the bench. So Atlanta played well enough to win. You tip your cap. We'll talk about Ja Morant's game later on in the show, but some things that I wanted to really kind of touch on to start off our conversation here about this contest. First and foremost, I don't fully understand Tuomas Isalo deciding to go with John Konchar as the starting center. And even if you want to say that Konchar wasn't the starting center, he was kind of the starting power forward, GG Jackson was right there. And I felt it was a missed opportunity. If you like the idea, as Tuomas Isalo has come out unprompted, I believe it was Parker Fleming that pointed this out on social media, unprompted, talking about how much you like Cam Spencer and Jock Landale together. I get it. Both of those guys are overperforming players. They're doing some things well. They do have a good chemistry. I understand wanting to keep them together. And if you want Jock Landale to come off the bench, because that's what his long-term role, if there is a long-term future with the Grizzlies, if that's what it's going to be, I'm cool with that too. There's logic behind both of those things. I don't understand the John Conchar choice. And I'm sure part of it has to do with the malleability of Conchar. That is his greatest strength. I call him white rice for a reason. It's partly a funny joke, but it's also partly true in that he goes with everything. So you put Conchar out there. It's not like the Grizzlies lost because John Conchar was the starting center, power forward, whatever you want to call him. I just thought it was a missed opportunity to reward a guy in Gigi Jackson, who we talked about on a recent episode. He's playing really well, right? He's playing really well right now. And that did continue in this game. 21 minutes played, 9 points, 4 for 6 from the field. He had a team worst -11 in plus minus. So maybe he didn't defend as well. You'd have to go back, watch the tape. Again, single game plus minus is flawed. But the Grizzlies did score 11 fewer points with Gigi on the court than without him. But he's been doing so well to this point. I would have given Gigi that start. I would have gone Gigi Jackson instead of John Conchar. And again, this is not me hating on John Conchar. I don't think the Grizzlies lost because of that choice. I just would have rewarded Gigi. I thought that was a missed opportunity. I also thought that you saw some good things from Jalen Wells for the first time in a long time. Now, it's not like Wells was overly efficient, right? 18 points on 16 shots. There was a time where Rudy Gay would have been crushed for that kind of line in the city of Memphis, right? But obviously, Wells is not Rudy Gay. Wells is a player that is still finding his footing on a consistent basis. Wells is a guy that the Desmond Bane trade to the Orlando Magic was partially made. That transaction occurred in part because the Grizzlies believe in what they have in Jalen Wells. And the duo of Jalen Wells and Cedric Howard did some good things against the Atlanta Hawks, despite Coward's unfortunate late turnover against the Hawks with C.J. McCollum having a timely steal. And again, 3 turnovers for Ced in 26 minutes played. So it's not just the mistakes that are made, it's the way that they're learning from the mistakes. And I think that we continue to see that with Cedric Howard, and you keep playing him regardless of losing the ball late or whatever the case might be, because he has the potential to be a very good player for your team. Jalen Wells is that elite role player that DeMichael talks about a lot. Zach Edey, that was kind of his ceiling until the ceiling got moved this year, given how well Edey has played in a small sample size. But Jalen Wells, being somebody that can knock down threes, being somebody that can be an elite defender on the perimeter. If you're going to move forward with Ja Morant on your roster, and we'll talk about, how realistic that is later on here in the show. Let's say in a hypothetical world, Ja does stick around. Having Coward and Wells as the 2 starting wings next to Morant makes sense because they're both plus defenders. That remains true of Jalen Wells. Even when his shot is not falling, he's a plus defender. So Wells was aggressive. He didn't shoot the 3 ball as well as he would have liked to for 9 from beyond the arc, but he was 6 for 16 overall. He was 4 for 4 from the charity stripe, so that tells me he was aggressive trying to get to the rim. That's good. Wells had a better performance against the Atlanta Hawks, and Cedric Howard continued a recent run of strong showings. So, no, I'm not happy that the Grizzlies lost. I'm not happy that Jaren Jackson Jr. had 5 turnovers and 5 personal fouls. Jaren didn't play poorly, but it wasn't his best game either. And again, if the Grizzlies are going to win games like this, if they're going to get back in the play-in conversation, if they're going to look at this current iteration of the roster and say, you know what, there might be something there, they need more from Jaren on a night-in, night-out basis. He didn't have it consistently in this game. He just didn't. But that doesn't mean that he should be traded to the New York Knicks, which we'll talk about to close out our program today. And it also doesn't mean, again, that you should think that the sky is falling after this loss. For a lot of reasons, this game being a defeat shouldn't be surprising. I do think the Grizzlies should be commended for the way they competed. They had a chance at the end, and the Hawks just made more plays. And given how Atlanta's been off since Monday, They didn't have the intense travel that the Grizzlies did. The Grizzlies literally came back from Europe on Monday, right? So I think that all things considered could have been better, but it certainly could have been worse as well for the Grizzlies. And something that should have Memphis fans feeling good one way or another is the play of Ja Morant in this particular contest. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, I'm going to break that down and why, again, whether he's traded or not, it was a good night for Memphis in the Ja Morant department. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by TurboTax. Full service. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They can handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every possible deduction. They also upload your documents, go about your day, and allow for updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing that an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate. Get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Thanks so much for hanging out with us on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you for being an everydayer. We appreciate you helping us make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Throw your ones up. If you haven't already done it, go check out our new Everydayer Club. There's access to an ad-free audio feed for the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. Plus, it gives an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server. I hung out in there a little bit on Wednesday. So did Matt Moore at HP Basketball. Make sure you're going into that server. Become a member. It includes a group chat just for listeners of the show. We'll continue to hang out in the Discord, not just on game days, but every day. Make sure you're going to this website, lockedongrizzlies.supercast.com. That's lockedongrizzlies.supercast.com. Become an everydayer to Locked On Grizzlies today. So Ja Morant had another good game. He's stringing together good performances. 2 games in a row where Ja looks like the Ja of old. 8 for 8 from the charity stripe, 23 points on 15 shots, 12 assists, 5 turnovers. That's still a little bit high, but again, that's essentially a little more than a 2-to-1 assist to turnover margin. That's good stuff. And the thing that really popped was not just his clutch performance at the end to give the Grizzlies a chance to win the game against Atlanta. It also was the fact that he was engaged defensively. 3 blocks, 2 of which were show stealing. Wow, he still has that explosiveness, that athleticism, all the things that some people were foolishly saying. Maybe it has passed Ja by. Maybe he doesn't have that lift that he once did. Of course he does. He just is much more selective with how he utilizes it. This is a 26-year-old young man that hasn't had a serious injury to a knee or an Achilles, knocking on all the wood around me. This is not someone who has the profile of somebody that you could write off and say, their athleticism has left them. I do believe that Ja makes a conscious choice to be more aware of how he attacks the basket on the offensive end, and he's violent still in his block attempts on the defensive end, and that really shined through against Atlanta. And that is something that, again, regardless of where you fall on the trade or not trade Ja Morant argument spectrum, it was a good night for you as a member of the Memphis Grizzlies fan base, somebody that follows the team, even if you're a Ja Morant fan, because for those that want Ja Morant to stay, and I want to stress, I think that's a majority of Memphians. It may not be the Grizzlies organization. Again, DeMichael Cole has said here on Locked On Grizzlies, he reiterated over at the Commercial Appeal, it looks more likely than not that Ja is still going to get traded here within the next 2 weeks before the trade deadline. You might think that's a mistake. Talk about it in the comments. Let's have a good chat there. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But DeMichael is still standing by his earlier reporting that a trade is more likely than not, at least as of this recording. If you think that is bad, which again, a majority of Memphians like Ja want him to stay would be my estimate, he looked the part of the superstar against the Atlanta Hawks. Maybe not a championship contending superstar, but he certainly looked the part of a guy that can go out there and help you compete on a night in, night out basis in the National Basketball Association. And while competing for championships is the end goal, I think it's okay to acknowledge that, you know what? In a market like Memphis, having a star that is beloved, that wants to be in the city, or at least says he wants to be in the city, backs it up with literal tattoo ink on his body, to have someone that has that personality, that charisma, that explosiveness, it's eye-popping. It gets your attention. And in theory, if Ja is able to stay on the court long-term, again, the greatest ability in life sometimes is availability. If Ja is able to do that, that's going to help the Memphis Grizzlies organization. It's going to help the city. People are going to get back into the groove when it comes to following the Grizzlies more closely. I do think Ja has a role to play in that. And this is 2 games in a row now, going back to the game in London, and now obviously this game in Memphis against the Hawks. 2 nights, 2 games where Ja looked like the old Ja, a major player in the National Basketball Association. That's good if you want him traded too, because if you believe the national reports that there's not much of a market manifesting for Ja Morant right now. Not many people want to make that call and make the trade for a guy that's played 79 games now over the last 3 seasons. If you're a little gun shy about such a deal, this is another check in the ledger of, hey, this guy still got it. Think about being a Milwaukee Buck right now, a Milwaukee Buck front office member, and you're watching this Ja Morant. While the fit with Giannis may not be perfect by any stretch of the imagination, you could argue that the fit with Damian Lillard would have been better than the one with Ja Morant. But if desperation is your middle name because you want to keep Giannis happy, it just got a little bit easier to talk yourself into a Ja Morant trade. Well, the reports suggest that Miami Heat are out on Ja Morant. The Toronto Raptors are out on Ja Morant. If you're desperate for a point guard, how could you possibly be out for a guy that has 20-plus points and 12-plus assists in the last couple of games? Does he need to string these performances together? Absolutely. And as we talked about on a recent episode of Locked On Grizzlies, there's a decent chance the Grizzlies understand that. And they need him to kind of go out there and play and audition and be ready to rock and roll to show what he's capable of. He still has that energy. It just looks different than it once did. He still has the capacity to take over a game. That holds tremendous value. And maybe it should hold value for Memphis in the way that if nobody offers a trade that checks the Grizzlies' boxes of draft capital, a young player, why wouldn't Ja Morant stay? It's not like the relationship is so far gone that the two sides aren't communicating at all and Morant hates Isolo. You don't get that vibe from in-game interactions. You watch him play, and there's certainly been times that he's been checked out. That Lakers game a while back stands out in my mind's eye. But Ja hasn't been checked out these last couple of games. And if you go back to the Berlin game when he didn't play, that was one of his most engaged games of the season in terms of interacting with his teammates, looking like his old self in terms of his joy. Maybe there has been some finality. Maybe there's a lot of public posturing in the media between Ja and Jack Kleiman, the Grizzlies GM. Maybe it's all a show. But the show has been pretty good the last couple of games. I'm tuning in. I'm ready for the next episode on Friday night. I want to see if this Ja Morant can keep the vibes going. Because if he can, it's good for the Memphis Grizzlies one way or another. If Ja Morant stays, this Ja can help the Grizzlies win basketball games. This Ja can help the Grizzlies continue to build around what they currently have. With the increased flexibility after the Desmond Bane trade, there is reason for optimism if this Ja is bought in and ready to roll. If you think it's all show and games and a dog and pony show, and Ja Morant's going to be traded in the next 2 weeks anyway, every game that Ja stacks, the price goes up a little bit more. And no, 2 games does not cancel out 2 years of a lack of availability. But 2 games becoming 3, 3 becoming 4, 4 becoming 5. Now you're able to talk yourself into it a little bit more easily. It's always going to be a calculated risk, always getting into the Ja Morant business. But it's a little bit easier to stomach when you're able to watch this guy play, and the game against the Magic on Sunday and the game against the Hawks on Wednesday is more of a norm after a week or so than the exception. How are you feeling about Ja Morant helping the Memphis Grizzlies in one way or another get a W on Wednesday night? Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Let me know in the comments. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out this edition of the show, talking about the ridiculousness of a Jaren Jackson Jr. trade to the New York Knicks. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Quo. New year, new systems. Am I right? This is the time where a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and we think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Quo makes everything so simple. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number. Nothing gets missed that way. Everybody can see the full conversation thread. Everybody can make replies in a much more easy, fast, and reliable, personal way. It's no surprise that Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slip away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNBA. That's QUO.com/LockedOnNBA. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Finishing up this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, I'm Joe Mullinax, your host for this edition of the show. Jaren Jackson Jr. Reports came out about the New York Knicks reaching out to teams like the Orlando Magic, the Charlotte Hornets, and mildly surprisingly, the Memphis Grizzlies with regards to one Karl Anthony Towns. Now, when you look at the Karl Anthony Towns contract, I think he makes about $52 million this year. It is assumed that if there was a Giannis trade to be made with Milwaukee, because if you remember back to this past summer, Shams Charania reported earlier in the year that this past summer, if Giannis were to be traded, the Knicks were his preferred destination, in part because New York, being New York, has, I believe, a direct flight to Athens, where Giannis's family now resides. Giannis is there in the offseason, but obviously in season, Giannis is in and around the United States and especially in Milwaukee. The logic goes that Karl Anthony Towns' contract would be necessary to help facilitate such a trade. Okay, that makes sense. But what if the Knicks can't get Giannis for whatever reason? Orlando, Charlotte, the Grizzlies are names that have been brought up. And it led to a conversation on X between me and multiple folks about Jaren versus Karl Anthony Towns. And I think that it is indicative of the larger perspective of what Jaren Jackson Jr. is to some of the folks that hang out in our comments. And I'm glad you do. I don't mean that as a negative. Please continue to do so. That talk about Jaren Jackson Jr.'s lack of rebounding, because to me, that is the biggest difference between the two players. Is Karl Anthony Towns a better scorer than Jaren? I don't know that I would say that definitively. I would probably give the edge to Cat. But over the last 3 years, Jaren has grown by leaps and bounds as a scorer of the basketball. Comparing Jaren from 3 years ago to Cat now, that's not fair. But if you look at what Jaren has done, especially the last season or so, as an isolation scorer, as somebody that can get to his own looks and convert, Jaren is closing the gap on Cat there. Cat is a much better rebounder. And I do think that is where the gap is the biggest. And I think that is where Grizzlies fans that are tired of a big, a 6'11", 240-some-pound big man in Jaren Jackson Jr., he got 6 rebounds against Atlanta in 32 minutes. Cedric Coward got more rebounds at 7. Jock Landale got almost double the rebounds at 11 in 4 less minutes. So you watch Jaren play, you wish he rebounded more. You see a big like Cat that plays the 4 position in a more traditional manner. It fires you up, right? I get that. I don't see Cat as that big of an upgrade over Jaren Jackson Jr. Is he a better individual player? Probably can say that, especially offensively. But you got to remember there's a defensive end of the court too. And Jaren Jackson Jr. is a much better defender than Karl Anthony Towns. New York Knicks fans currently are not necessarily loving the Karl Anthony Towns experience. And the major reason why is lapses defensively, lack of attention to detail, lack of hustle. Whatever the descriptor, it usually can be found when it comes to Karl Anthony Towns playing defense. That is not Jaren. Jaren is playing maybe his best defensive season since his Defensive Player of the Year campaign. I don't think he's going to win that this year, but I do believe he's going to be back in that all-defense mix because of the things that he's doing on that end of the court for the Memphis Grizzlies. Karl-Anthony Towns is not that level of player. And the Knicks conversation, even if you do believe that Cat would be an upgrade over Jaren, again, I think in terms of overall player, maybe that's true. I don't know that I love the fit. The idea that the Grizzlies would trade Jaren but keep Ja Morant is completely and totally insane. And I do mean that. I think you can make a logical argument for keeping Ja Morant. We've talked about it here on this episode. Memphis loves him. And if he plays at the level that he's capable of, he is worth more to the Grizzlies than he would be anywhere else. You're not getting fair value back in a trade. Might as well see if you can make it work. There's logic there. Personally, I think you can logically argue for a scorched earth rebuild. Because if you move on from Ja, as I've said for the last year or so, if Ja Morant's not there, what's the point? And I like Jaren Jackson Jr. I think he's held down the fort. I think that he has been the guy for the last couple of years with Ja in and out of the lineup. Jaren has been the one that has grown as a player, and Jaren has been the one that the Grizzlies could depend on. And that matters. Raw talent and ability only gets you so far. You have to be professional, and you have to be capable of being there when your team needs you. Jaren Jackson Jr. has done just that and then some for the Memphis Grizzlies. But he's not the superstar that Ja Morant is. So if you're trading Ja, I think it makes sense to listen on offers for Jaren. And if somebody knocks your socks off, it's been pretty widely reported by numerous national media outlets that Jaren Jackson Jr. has a wider breadth of trade interest than Ja Morant does. So I think there would be a Jaren trade suitor, to be sure, if not multiple. And then maybe you get into a little bit of a haggling situation and you even increase the value more. What doesn't make sense is keeping Ja, who again has played 79 games now over the span of 3 years, and trading Jaren. Especially for a player like Karl-Anthony Towns, who, if he is traded by the New York Knicks, this would be the second time that he's been traded by a team. You could argue it's for the contract, but I think it's because of fit, whether it's personality fit, the way that they are on the court. If you're trying to build a team around Zach Edey and Cedric Coward moving forward, I don't know that bringing in a Karl-Anthony Towns makes sense and jives with that alignment of thinking. I don't know that keeping Ja Morant and pairing him with a Karl-Anthony Towns aligns with that type of thinking. So again, you want to keep Ja? I think there's a totally logical argument for that, and I would not bat an eye if Ja Morant is still a member of the Memphis Grizzlies at the end of the trade deadline. If both Ja and Jaren are traded by the end of the trade deadline, I'd be okay with that too. I think you can pretty easily make an argument that this era of Grizzlies basketball has reached its conclusion. Trading Jaren but not Ja makes no sense. I would argue that trading Ja but not Jaren makes more sense, but it's still not as sensical as either keeping Ja or trading them both. The least logical option would be trading Jaren and not trading Ja, because you are completely ignoring the context of what has been the last 3 years of Memphis Grizzlies basketball. And you're not accepting what Jaren Jackson Jr. has been for the franchise, and you're providing a grace to Ja that you are not providing to Jaren. And to me, that is not only unfair, it is not sound NBA team building logic. Thanks so much for being with me on this edition of the podcast. It is much appreciated. I am so happy that you're here. Hopefully you'll stick around for the long haul and be an everydayer. Hopefully you'll be in on our show tomorrow. You know we got to get down on a Friday, so our Friday edition of the podcast, DeMichael will be back with us. We'll talk Grizzlies, Pelicans, hopefully get some updates on Ja Morant, all that sort of fun stuff. Make sure you're subscribing, following Locked On Grizzlies so you get all the latest episodes, and make sure you're following me on X at Joe Mullinax. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Grizzlies ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head over to lockedongrizzlies.supercast.com. That's lockedongrizzlies.supercast.com and become a member of the Everydayer Club today. For those of you on video, we will be kicking you over to the first ever 24/7 national NBA YouTube channel. On audio, make sure that you are making your second listen NBA game night on Locked On NBA. I'm Joe Mullinax. Thank you for being with me on this edition of the show on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. We appreciate you hanging out. We'll catch you back